Welcome back to Social Psychology. We're grooving to the best of the 70s and 80s, courtesy of my neighbor behind me, and talking about why it's not so terrible, or at least not so uncommon, to do terrible things. In the second installment on aggression, what I call the aggressive brain, we're going to talk about how these 3 pounds of meat in your head right up here make you do terrible things. Now, you may have heard before people talking about being of 2 minds about something, as if there are 2 minds in your head trying to make decisions at once, like in a situation where you really want something, but you know you shouldn't have it. Now, what might surprise you is that you, in a lot of ways, do have 2 minds in your head. You've got this thing right up front here, one of the most powerful pieces of programming equipment in the known universe, your prefrontal cortex, that's all about making intellectual decisions, making good, smart decisions that may not pay off right now, but will help you do better later. That's the part of your brain that thinks about the job you're going to get in the future that's going to make you tons of money, that tells you should sit here and watch this video now instead of, I don't know, getting stoned and playing video games on your mom's couch. Now, deep down inside your brain, there's a much older part of your brain, something we often call the lizard brain, this thing called the amygdala inside the limbic system that makes decisions based on emotion, especially aggression and fear. And this puts us in a lot of situations where you may feel you want to act aggressively, but you know that you shouldn't. And this helps us explain why it is we act aggressively in certain situations. There are situations that make the amygdala act particularly well, but may get in the way of the prefrontal cortex. An illustration of these 2 different systems examines why it is we might, in fact, not act aggressively. There are many pregnant women who are told they shouldn't be around cats while they're pregnant because they might contract something called toxoplasmosis, or cat scratch fever. While toxoplasmosis isn't caused by cat scratches, you can get it through cat saliva. And you get it through an infection of a parasite known as Toxoplasma gondii. Toxoplasma gondii, turns out, doesn't want to be in people at all, but it does like being in cats, and it turns out, it ends up really liking being inside rats and mice. Now, it does this out of necessity. Things that infect people don't need to infect other animals too, because we sneeze, we cough, we touch things, then we share those with other people. Really easy to do because we're social creatures. But cats, you know as well as I do, are not social creatures. I've never seen 2 cats that got along better than absolutely hating each other. So in order to jump from one cat to another, what toxoplasmosis does, or Toxoplasma gondii does, is it travels in cat saliva, gets on their paws, gets transitioned to the ground where they walk, and then a rat or a mouse that comes across it will get that infection. That infection then travels through the rat or the mouse's digestive system, into their bloodstream, into their brain, where it attacks one specific part of the brain, part you might guess, called the amygdala. It destroys the amygdala and that rat or mouse's ability to feel fear, so that rat or mouse will come nose to nose with the cat, no problem at all, and what will happen is what you would expect would happen: the cat gets a nice snack and an infection of Toxoplasma gondii. What this illustrates is that these 2 parts of your brain can function totally separately. Your amygdala can make decisions based on fear and aggression, and your intellectual brain can make decisions totally without those. And you probably know this, thinking back the decisions you make, and it helps explain how in those situations that get rid of your prefrontal cortex, you're so likely to want to act aggressively. Now, one of the things that we see is that different people have different what are called limbic activation thresholds. Well, in other words, what this means is that they require different levels of excitement for us to see that limbic system kick on. If you know people who are they are daredevils, they're thrill seekers, the kind of people who love roller coasters and bungee jumping and skydiving. These are people with a really high limbic activation threshold. It doesn't turn on without a lot of excitement. These people a lot of times also tend not to act aggressively unless they're pushed really far. Many of us also may be worrywarts, homebodies. It doesn't take a whole lot to turn on that limbic system, whether for aggression or for fear. You're chill, you're quiet, you're calm, you like to sit at home and do what you do, but it doesn't take a whole lot to get you angry, to get you charged up. We also tend to see that one of the reasons we might not act based on our amygdala's decision-making, right, even though it wants to act aggressively, is because that prefrontal cortex gets in the way, says, hey, you know, you really shouldn't be doing this thing. This also allows us to predict that situations in which we'd be aggressive are situations not just that turn on our limbic systems, but also turn off our prefrontal cortices. Your prefrontal cortex is something that, while really powerful, requires a lot of power to run. So you might be able to predict times then in which your prefrontal cortex doesn't work that well. When you're tired, when you're hungry, when you've been drinking too much, when you're distracted or already aggressive, when you've had to put a lot of energy into something else. Think about the times that you're likely to get in an argument with your significant other, with your roommates, with your friends. There's situations in which your prefrontal cortex is ragged out. You may have been told the same thing my mother and grandmother told me: never go to bed angry. But you know what happens when you try not to go to bed angry? You just end up making the situation worse. If you're in a fight with your significant other or your friend or your roommate, go to bed, sleep on it, wake up in the morning, realize how stupid you've been, and then go apologize. That's really all it takes, because once that prefrontal cortex is up and running again, we can chill out. Now, this doesn't mean that when your prefrontal cortex is working well, that it always gets us out of trouble. In fact, a lot of times we fall prey to biases and heuristics that the prefrontal cortex relies on, and we end up stuck in cycles of aggression. In fact, often when we're feeling aggressive, when we're feeling angry, we tend to do things like distance ourselves from others. And like you know from construal level theory, that the farther away something is, the more abstract it is. We separate ourselves from others, both physically but also cognitively, and it makes it easier for us to demonize them, to dehumanize them, to see them as different from us, and it's easier for us to see them as an object of aggression. We also tend to do things like take on our own perspectives, value our own perspective, and have a hard time seeing their perspectives. And specifically, we also fall prey to something called reactive devaluation. Reactive devaluation is something that we have seen in American politics like crazy, and that you have probably seen with classes, with friends, with roommates, with coworkers. Have you ever noticed that sometimes when you want to convince somebody to do something, that you need to convince them it was their idea in the first place? That especially if you've been in an argument with someone, you can't possibly be the one to tell them that they need to do something differently? And that's because when we're feeling aggressive towards somebody, we tend to reactively devalue their ideas simply because they are their ideas. If you're in an argument with somebody and you keep pushing to try to get them to take these ideas, they're going to start to act aggressive. And because they act aggressively, they're going to see you as a problem, and they'll see any idea you have as a problem. What this means is that even if you try to reconcile, even if you say that you're sorry and you try to identify how to make things better, they're going to see those things as insincere. They're going to see those things as incorrect just because you said them. Now, if you try to imagine what it is that would be best for getting out of this kind of an aggression situation, you can think of a few things. Give the other person space. Don't give them the opportunity to reactively devalue your ideas. If you're feeling aggressive, walk away. Take 5, take 10. One of my favorite solutions, have a snack. It turns out when we try to exercise our prefrontal cortex too much, we suffer from something called ego depletion. Whenever you've had to exercise a lot of self-control, it makes it harder to exercise further self-control. But ego depletion is easily stopped, or at least lessened, by having a quick snack. It turns out that when people eat something loaded with glucose, like a chocolate chip cookie, they have better self-control. So don't maybe suggest that your significant other is hungry and just needs to eat something, but instead maybe offer some fresh baked cookies. Not only will it make you look nice, and they'll probably enjoy eating the cookies, that glucose will help them be a little bit more rational too. Also, make sure you get some rest. Make sure that you get a chance to do some things that you want to. Put yourself in a good situation. Help the other person do something they want. But then also, of course, play up your similarities. Like when we talk about stereotyping, when we talk about group functioning, we always think of others better when we have an opportunity to connect with them directly. So, just to recap, you do have two minds, your limbic system and your prefrontal cortex, and we tend to do better in groups when we have an opportunity to use the prefrontal cortex, not the limbic system. So, thanks for sticking with the classic rock, with my shaky selfie stick, and with the video lectures. I'll look forward to seeing you guys in class, and as always, let me know if you have any questions. This is Ryan Keith in Social Psychology.